Hello everyone, so today I'll be making a book review of a book called For Whom the Bells Toll by Ernest Hemingway, which is my favorite Hemingway book, so I'm really excited to talk about it today. So, what is the book about? The book is set during the Spanish Civil War in the 30s, which was raging against the Republicans and the Fascists, a civil war within Spain. And the main character of the book is an American voluntary soldier named Robert Jordan, who volunteers and works as a dynamiter. His job is to, or the task that he's sent off to, is to blow up this strategic bridge for the fascists in order to hinder their attacks. So he's sent to a small battalion of Republican soldiers who are hiding and are isolated in sort of this pine forest on a hill and in a cave. And this is where he will be blowing up the bridge from. So he's sent to this battalion, and the whole novel is basically set in this small isolated universe of the cave and all the characters there and their stories. So who is this main character, Robert Jordan? I would say he is the typical Hemingway character in all of Hemingway's books. You have this very masculine and unemotional man who is a man of actions, who doesn't really display much emotions or what's going on in his inner, but is always out there in the world. So in the book we very rarely get a description of what he is feeling and thinking on the inside. All of the writing is about taking place in dialogues, or what Robert Jordan sees in the external world, but very rarely do we get this inner monologue. So an example of this is when he's speaking to this woman who he later falls in love, which I will talk about later. And so when he meets her this first time and sees her beauty and is struck by her beauty and is nervous, it's described as this: every time Robert Jordan looked at her, he could feel a thickness in his throat. So what's so interesting about this example, and this is how, there's so many more of this, is that instead of saying he looked at her and he felt something on the inside, maybe he felt like joy or nervousness, he describes a bodily sensation, the thickness of his throat, which just shows that Robert Jordan is a man of the external world, of the body, not so much of the inside inner emotional life. So in the same scene, there's another description when he's talking to this beautiful girl. He realized too that it was hard for him to look at her because it made his voice change so. So here his voice, which is for most people, so connected to the personality and to our inner self, is something detached. It's something else. He feels his voice, what was it? He feels his voice change. His voice change, as if it was something totally different. Most people feel that they are in control of their voice, and the voice is an expression of their inner self. But for Jordan Peterson, his voice is just as alien and detached as his little finger. It's something entirely else, which changes at its own will. So Robert Jordan is doesn't display emotions, and he's a very serious man, and what's most important for him is fulfilling his action, doing his duty, which is blowing up the bridge. And so he's really focused on this. So he's talking to another soldier or a person at this cave who he's working together with. He was talking beside her, but his mind was thinking of the problem of the bridge now, and it was all clear and hard and sharp, as when a camera lens is brought into focus. So this quote shows two things. I think it's his sort of detachment from other people. So he's talking to this woman, but he just zones out and starts to think about his duty, his actions, showing that he prioritizes action and duty over people. And also this focusing in like a camera lens shows, it's also a part of his character, that he's laser focused, almost like a machine. And one of the most important things of this book, I think that this character, Robert Jordan, is reflected and is expressed not just by describing his person, but the actual language that Hemingway himself uses in this book. So it's very typical of Hemingway prose of being very simple and straightforward, just describing things as they are without some superfluous poetry or emotions or all of this stuff. So an example of this, I'll read to you guys. He sat on the ground by the gypsy, and the afternoon sunlight came down through the tree tops and was warm on his outstretched legs. He could smell the food now in the cave, the smell of oil and of onions and of meat frying, and his stomach moved with hunger inside of him. So this shows the language expressed is very simple and straightforward. There's no metaphors or no complex similes or poetry. It's very straightforward. He was lying there, he smells the food, and he's hungry. And this also then expresses who he is as a person, because just as the prose is simple, he's a very simple man. He's just laying there, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on his body, again showing he's a very embodied person. And he's laying there, smelling the food and feeling hungry. There's no inner thoughts, no inner anxiety, or no chattering in the skull of what if this happens, or this, or I'm feeling sad right now or anxious. There's nothing. He's just totally neutral inside, totally aware of his surroundings. And this is expressed in this, his simple person is expressed in the simple prose that Hemingway uses. And I think this very simple prose writing style from Hemingway comes from his time as a journalist. He started his life as a journalist, where you have to write very concise and straightforward, describing events. Like if you're a sports journalist, you have to describe the events of the match, what happened there in the outside world, not so much about the inner feelings or life of the journalist. And this is very interesting because there's a part in the book where he receives a telegram. Oh no, he doesn't receive a telegram, he writes one. He's supposed to write a telegram to another Spanish Republican soldier named Goltz. So Hemingway writes, concentrating on his report to Goltz, trying to put it in the fewest words and still make it absolutely convincing. This is sort of like a manifesto of Hemingway's literary style, putting it as the fewest and most simplest, straightforward words, and thus making it as convincing, making it as sort of most effective and going straight to the heart, nothing superfluous. Despite this sort of hard external, no inner emotional life, we get glimpses of the vulnerability and emotionality of Jordan Peterson. And one point of this is that the young woman who I mentioned before, the young beautiful woman, is named Maria, and throughout his time in this cave they will fall in love. And she had been captured by the fascists and raped by the soldiers there. And this is of course very traumatic, a very traumatic experience. And when they fall in love, she tells this to him, sort of opens up her vulnerability. And then we see something interesting happen with with Robert Jordan. So there's a glimpse that Robert himself is carrying upon trauma. So he is, as Maria is telling her trauma, he sort of starts, maybe not even voluntarily, but ends up starting to talk about his grandfather, who was he was in the Republican National Committee, and I don't know exactly, I guess during the American Civil War or something, or in some situation his grandfather was captured by the enemies, and Robert Jordan's grandfather shot himself to avoid being tortured. And then Maria says, when Robert tells this to her, Maria says, My father, she said, could not obtain a weapon. Oh, I'm glad that your father had the good fortune to obtain a weapon. And then Robert Jordan says, yes, it was pretty lucky, Robert Jordan said. Should we talk about something else? So here we see that he's very reluctant to talk about his past and about the potential traumas and emotions there. And then we start to suspect that this sort of very solid and hard and unemotional external is maybe some sort of a defense mechanism, or some sort of compensation that for this inner secret trauma, which maybe he is not even conscious of himself, that he doesn't want to come up to the surface. Very, very rarely we get glimpses into Robert Jordan's past, and that's why when they happen they're so much more important and they're so much more effectful, even because he's so neutral. So even at the smallest hint of emotion and vulnerability, they sort of shine up, and you really notice them, and they're really effectful. So as the book progresses, we see more and more of these glimpses of weakness in this man who seems so strong, masculine, action orientated. So here in this part we get a small inner monologue, very simple, but we get a sort of glimpse into his inner, and he writes, where he's speaking to himself. Turn off the thinking now, old timer, old comrade. You're a bridge blower now, not a thinker. So here we see that he is dealing, in fact, with these common things that everyone experiences in the inner, such as overthinking. And he's struggling against them, convincing himself not to think. He says, you're not a thinker, you're a bridge blower. He wants to be this man of action, maybe as an escape from anxiety, overthinking, trauma. So later on we get a very something very revealing. He's in this mission to blow up the bridge, and everything is not going as planned. I'll talk more about this later. And he suddenly says to himself, oh hell, I wish grandfather was here. And this sort of shines to us, like I described before, because he's so restricted. But now when he finally reveals some vulnerability or connected to the grandpa in his past, it becomes so much more effectful and so much more emotional. You know, I think that's one of the greatness with Hemingway's writing, is because it's so restricted and straightforward, the moments when it is emotional, that emotionality becomes so much more effectful because it's sort of surrounded by this gray cloud of straightforwardness and simplicity. So when this emotion comes, it's like a bright sun shining, breaking through these gray clouds and shining on us, and we really feel it very, very much. So an example of this simple, unpoetic yet in its own way poetic language and description of Hemingway, which I forgot to mention before, is actually it's found in the first sentence of the first chapter, and it's one of my probably favorite parts. It goes like this: he lay flat on the brown pine needle floor of the forest, his chin on his folded arms, and high overhead the wind blew in the tops of the pine trees. So it's just this simple scene of him laying on the pine floor, and you really feel that you are there, and sort of, it's hard to describe, just being in the moment there, and then not really thinking about anything else, just enjoying the moment basically. And there's some tension in it as well. Obviously he's lying on the pine floor because he's on a military mission, so there's some tension and something mysterious about it, yet totally lucid and clear. So as I mentioned before, Robert Jordan falls in love with this young, beautiful woman named Maria. The woman who had been captured by the fascists and raped. She was then later released, and now she's there with them at this cave, and they fall in love. And I think this is it's a beautiful moment in the book, because we always have this, like I said, unemotional, distant, cold young man, but he falls in love. And yeah, there's a very big contrast and duality in this. And I think Hemingway's love language is very symptomatic of his literary style, and I think it's very interesting how he describes the love between these two people, because again, he's in love, but he still uses the same straightforward, simple prose and his embodiment. So him and Maria, they're laying beside each other in the forest, and he writes, in the night, she did not awake, and he rolled onto his side, away from her, with his head out of the robe in the cold again. He lay awake a moment, feeling the long sleeping luxury of his fatigue, and then the smooth tactile happiness of their two bodies touching. So again, he's embodied his. So he doesn't say that, oh, I'm laying here beside this woman I love, I feel this for her, these emotions. His enjoyment of her is this, as he says, tactile, physical touch between their bodies, which, you know, people might say that this is unemotional and just cares about the body, but I think there is a secret or underlying emotionality within this touch of the body. There's something emotional in physical contact, like a hug, for example. But his love for Maria poses a dilemma for him. Now he's still the man of action and very concerned about doing his duty. And now he's torn between his duty and his love. And this is the biggest conflict for Robert Jordan now. And it will have a very effectful ending, as I will describe soon. So in the mission to blow up the bridge, they are ambushed, and firing starts and shots between the Republicans and fascists, and Robert Jordan injures his leg, and so much that he can't, the others are fleeing and he can't follow with them because of his injured leg, so they are forced to leave him there. And this is terrible for Maria and terrible for everyone. But this is interesting, because did he ever love Maria? Because he accepts his death. He tells them to go, I will stay. He sort of accepts it as if he wants to die. Maybe that was the whole purpose of traveling, volunteering for the Spanish army to fight. Maybe there is something nihilistic about him, and I don't know. So he's laying there after the others retreat, leaving him there, and he's all alone, lying on this pine floor of the forest, and the fascists are with time going to come to him, and well, he's gonna meet his death. And he's struggling now with accepting his death, because he has this rational mindset of death, sort of Epicurean philosophy of life is nothing to fear, etc., etc. But we're actually there in the moment of death. Your unconscious and involuntary emotions bubble up to the surface, and so he's struggling. So concerning his death, he writes, he joked about it to himself, but he looked at the sky and at the far mountains, and he swallowed the wine, and he did not want it. So this resistance, this fear of death, showing his vulnerability, which, like I said before, is so effectful. And then he writes, dying was nothing, and he had no picture of it, nor fear of it in his mind. But living was a field of grain blowing in the wind on the side of a hill. Living was a hawk in the sky. And I don't think I can comment so much about it. It's just such a poetic, in Hemingway's simple style, poetic image living was like a hawk in the sky. That image is mysterious. We don't exactly know what it means, but so lucid, so clear, so exact, so poignant. So before I read to you guys the first sentence, which I think is great, and maybe I said that it was greatest, but that's incorrect. The last sentence is my favorite from the book, and it's a mirror of the first sentence. It ends where it starts, namely on the pine floor of the forest. He writes, the last sentence: Robert Jordan lay behind the tree, holding on to himself very carefully and dedicated to keep his hand steady. He was waiting until officers reached the sunlight place where the first trees of the pine forest joined the green slope of the meadow. He could feel his heart beating against the pine needle floor of the forest. That last sentence. He could feel his heart beating against the pine needle floor of the forest. This enormous tension, the officers, the fascists coming to capture him. And then this sort of last moment of total awareness of the moment being there now, laying on the floor, feeling his heart beat against the pine floor. And to me, I think that he dies in this moment. Because at death, I think we get an enormous... When we're living, we're always thinking about the past, the future. We're always anxious, overthinking. We're not enjoying the present moment. But I think in the moment of death, all that sort of goes away, and we're zoom in into the present moment, and we're here. We're just totally empty inside and experience the world, the external world, as it is, without our thoughts about it.